I'll introduce myself briefly. So I'm Juho Jantunen. I'm a principal solutions architect with AWS. So I work with games customers. I've been with AWS like 4.5 years now. I work with hundreds of games customers globally. I'm focusing on game backend solutions, game server hosting solutions. I'm a backend in the games industry, as many of us do. I'm really excited to have these guys on the stage, all of them at the same time. We're going to talk about backends. So obviously, like many of you here know what a game backend is, but just to recap a little bit. So when we talk about game backends, we talk about things like player identity, player data management. We talk about leaderboards, matchmaking, but also sometimes things like game server hosting. So it's all the social features. So it's like all the different components you need to build an online presence for a game. And obviously, like all the panelists work for game backend, build game backend solutions for the customers. We're going to talk about like building versus buying backends, and like what are the components you're going to build, what are the components you maybe want to buy. I think let's kick it off. So I think the first thing I want to do is like if you do a quick intro of yourself, introduce yourself a little bit, and then like share something about like your how you got into the backend business. Sure, we'll start with that.
All right. So thank you, Juho. So again, my name's Ed Smith. I have been with AccelByte. I think I might just be the newest member of AccelByte. I've been there since the beginning of the year. I have gotten into the game industry back in 2016 through perhaps an unconventional route. Many folks come in through the industry itself, come through studios. I actually started my career in technology sales, but I was always very passionate about video games, always loved video games. Command & Conquer and StarCraft were my favorite. They were my guilty pleasure as a kid. Not a guilty pleasure, they're just awesome. Cane lips. So I ended up working with AWS for about 10 years. During that time, I helped set up what has now become AWS Game Tech, among many other great people in this room. See many familiar and friendly faces. And that's, I ended up in AccelByte, like I said, a couple of months ago. What got me really excited is that I see a lot of parallels between AWS in its early years and what I think the back-end industry looks like today. And perhaps that's something we'll get into later on in some of the questions.
For sure, thanks.
Over to me?
Yes.
So I am the founding engineer at Heroic Labs. I've been working on game tech for about 9 years. Before building game tech, I worked in database technology, helped with some of the chat infrastructure for League of Legends, worked on Bird's Nest, which was Rovio Entertainment's game backend at the time. So I've been exposed to it for a long time. And what prompted us to build our tech was the problems that we saw studios suffering in when they were trying to do large, highly scalable social games. And so that's what got me excited to build the company that we have today.
Yeah, great. And then the other Chris.
All right. My name is Chris. I got into games at PopCap, EA, doing backend for early social mobile. Went to Riot for 7 years working on League of Legends backend. Our team led rebuilding all of the matchmaking, matchmaking, party, invites, draft, and all that fun stuff. So after doing that for a long time, started thinking about how we could take some of the lessons learned. My team was called Player Behavior, and we worked on a lot of the anti-toxicity stuff. So in my mind, we did like the first generation of research into how do we do better for social online games. So our focus at Pragma is basically building extremely high-scale, rich live service backend online games platform. We're built as a source license engine because any of us who've spent time hoping that our central tech team would solve our problems for us and getting kind of stuck behind that was kind of pillar number one for us, that game team needs to be in full control. So that's been our focus. We've been at it for about 4.5 years. Started launching games with studios this year, and we're having a ton of fun.
So let's do the first question. So what I wanted to kick this off with was that where do you see the industry is today? Look at like the past, let's say 5 years on like building your own backend or buying a solution, like what's happened and where are we heading? Maybe we can start with like, let's reverse it. So maybe Chris Cobb, you can start.
Yeah, I think for any bigger AAA studios, really your only option for most of the last 20 years has been to build it yourself. And one of the frustrations in that is game teams are just going through the same motions, going through the same engineering cycle. So, we saw this with the game engines where, anyone who's read Tomorrow can talk about what it meant to build your own game engine from scratch and that kind of ethos that I think games we kind of came up in. But in the last 10 years, 15 years, we've really seen the maturity of Unity, Unreal as a platform. And importantly, you've got embedded in that maybe thousands of engineering years worth of knowledge in insight. So I think where we're at with backends is we've come out of we've been in this motion of everybody has to build it from scratch and start back over. And I think now is the right time for us to consolidate all of those lessons learned, all the patterns of scalability and what you need to do to build something that can actually launch. Got the chance to talk at GDC 2 years back about how to crash your server on launch day. And one of the unique things about games is that we have to prepare ourselves for, you have the most players show up on day one, which is a lot different than other apps and other products. So preparing for launch has all of these problems of will it scale, are we ready, what happens if it doesn't? So I think we're at a really good spot as an industry to start taking those lessons learned, invest in some kind of technology stack that lets teams build on top. And ideally, your game team gets to pump out cool, novel game design features and not just spend a ton of engineering resources rebuilding the kind of same core services.
I think I would agree. From what we experience talking to studios at the moment, it's still very much a build versus buy discussion. I think that's because a lot of the technical directorship at studios are worried about the creative freedom that they want to have when they're building games. And if they don't start from day one with that creative freedom, they might get constrained in some way. And as you're going through that process of trying to discover what your game is going to be, how that core mechanic is going to then be affected by all of the additional services that you need to put around it, there's that concern about what happens if it doesn't give you the flexibility that you needed. And so I think one area that we tend to kind of solve that problem with studios is we've basically seen everything. We've done grand strategy, we've done mid-core RPG, we've done battle royale, we've done match 3, merging, bubble shooter. We've done a lot of different game genres over time. And so I think we're able to show studios that you're not going to end up being creatively constrained. So what you typically land into build now becomes something that could be buy.
Yeah. All right, cool. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, I'll plus one what a lot of gentlemen up here have stated. I will also add that we've recently done a research study with Omdia, and we're going to be releasing that in the next couple of days, I believe. But as part of that, we saw that 47% of the game studios that we had asked about build versus buy, 47% of them said that it is far too difficult to build and maintain and create your own games backend. And about 44% of them are saying that that time spent is sort of an undifferentiated heavy lifting. Doing that is not part of your core mission of making great games. And so customers, I believe, are looking towards back-end solution providers like us here on stage and others out there on the market to really ensure that they're able to get their game out to the market in a way that's fast. And I believe that's one of the key things, as I mentioned in my intro, that was really interesting for me, is seeing that I think that we're in a unique point in the industry where a lot of indies and new developers are going to have this opportunity where they don't have to build it themselves. That's not necessarily going to be the norm. It's going to allow them to get their product out to market faster, focus on the core gameplay loop, and really make themselves competitive with some of the AAA developers that we saw, day in, day out.
All right, yeah, thanks. Yeah, Chris, you mentioned the customers want to, or developers want to sort of customize or extend things. Like that's one of my favorite topics. Like I work with all of you, I also build like solutions on how you build custom solutions on AWS for backends. What I'm interested in, what's your view on, what are the things that you definitely would not build? And what are the things where you maybe want to are there parts of the backend that are part of the innovation of the game, part of that's your sort of core thing? And how do you see your customers requesting ways to extend your solutions and where's that line? I think we can start with you, Chris.
Okay, so areas that I think the studio is always going to need to own I think as a game starts to scale and you start thinking about analytics, a lot of the kind of commoditized solutions around that simply won't go deep enough into what you need to do to understand players. So I think ultimately, at least what we've seen with the studios that we work with, they will end up needing to go into a data lake and building tooling to be able to allow them to achieve the kind of insights they want to achieve about retention with players. So I think that's something that most studios will end up owning, no matter what. In terms of extendability and customizability, when we take our tech into a studio to help them with whatever they're trying to work through on the social or competitive features they want to add to the game, it's about making sure that it integrates with whatever workflow and whatever existing tooling they already have. That's where the extendability really has to shine. And that's why we don't really distribute our technology as a service, we distribute it as a product. And for us, that's a big differentiating point because it means that we can put it inside whatever environment the studio is already operating in. And therefore, we can bind it to the systems that already exist. So that's our way of thinking about extendability at this point.
All right, cool. So like analytics, especially, and then like extending to some systems that they already have, some custom features. Cool. You guys, and that?
Miri.
Yeah, you can go first. Anything goes. I get to speak.
Okay. So yeah, I think, again, referencing that study that we have coming out later this week, extendability was considered one of the top reasons that people would be looking to buy versus build, among other reasons such as, cross-platform compatibility, engine integration, et cetera. I think one of the things that's really important when it comes to extendability is that customers are naturally very demanding. And when they come with their games, they want to make sure that they're getting something that is really tailor fit for their specific needs. So while whatever we offer out of the box may cover the vast majority of their needs, there's always going to be elements of it that maybe they consider as part of their unique selling proposition or a unique part of their actual gameplay experience. I think it's incumbent upon all of us to make sure that we're serving those customer needs. I think what's great is similar to the time I had at Amazon. Over time, as we see more and more of these customers doing this, we see more and more customers coming with different use cases. We'll start to recognize patterns. We will start to become better as providers, partners to our customers, and really start to hone in that product and give them something that really is absolutely tailor fit for all of their needs and build to better perform for them.
Cool.
Yeah. I mean, I'd probably take that and kind of push it further, which is as a game studio, your job is to build a compelling game. And some of that is, core gameplay, design, iteration. Some of that's stuff like an account service that just needs to exist and be there. And it's basically, having been working on these large back-end games for a long time, you get in this position where if you've got another team or another group somewhere else that is responsible for something critical path, then you're in this position where like, hey, this is our objective, this is the game feature we're trying to build, and I'm gonna go negotiate with some central tech team or some other party or somebody else. And as soon as your team is stuck behind waiting on a feature from someone else, I think you're already just dead in the water. Like as a game team, we have to iterate so fast, both budgets and actually launching. If your game's already live, you're trying to pump out new content in every week or two. So a fundamental characteristic, I think, of something that's going to help game studios launch is there exists some class of the online features that you just need to work. Accounts is complex and it has to scale. Your account backend server is going to get slammed in the face on launch day. So you got to build things like logging queues and all the stuff you do to protect that launch. But once you get into like the rich game design features of player data and progression systems, one of our processes is to take, what one or two of our studios needs as far as their game design. Then we go out and look at 6 games in the market, the League or Fortnite or Apex or any of these others. And then you have to kind of pattern match across all of them. And the reality is that you can't build a feature that says, oh, we have quests now. The reality is you have a game design for a quest system that is something part of the game experience you're trying to create. So a big part of the posture that we take is we want to help you solve the problems that are undifferentiated accounts. We need to make that scale so you can actually launch. But then the rest of it is just tools. It's like, here's a set of patterns for you to write a new feature, and that needs to go end to end from the game client to the back end. So a lot of our patterns are built around not telling you, here's a version of a feature, take it or leave it. Instead, we're like, here's, maybe an example implementation, but here's a set of building blocks. And so we talk a lot about trying to make the easy thing, the important things easy, but everything possible. And that's a big part of, I think, making something that supports studios and gives them the control to build and ship their game and not get stuck waiting on a feature request that you hope somebody bothers to prioritize.
All right, great. So I guess, we all agree there's a set of baseline features that you probably don't want to build. There's user identity or stuff like that. But then everyone wants to be special. They want to customize. They have their own differentiating things in their games that they want. So that's something you want to look for. You want to look for a solution that you're able to extend. All right, let's move on. Let's move on to game launches. So game launches they can be stressful. I've been through many myself, and I've had restless nights before and restless nights, not sleeping afterwards, fixing the bugs. So I've been there. Many of us have been there. You guys have probably been there as well. So if we think about from the backend perspective, what are the key things you need to consider when you're heading to a game launch? And also, what is the best, when do you need to start getting a backend in? Is it late in the game? Is it early in the game? That's two questions, but let's start with you. Ed, you can answer one or two of those.
Sure. So I think working through the customer's game launch, it's important to understand and work backwards from what it is that they're trying to accomplish and building out a roadmap that leads up to that launch. What are the milestones that need to occur during that time? What are the support that you need? Who are the resources you need? Features, functionality. Perhaps there's different critical milestones, maybe an early access or a beta. And how do we kind of support our customers on that journey? And so we take support sort of as a product. It's something that we want to make sure is honed and grown and developed and becomes better over time and really meets the demands of our customers as they go towards that launch. Working with them throughout every stage of that development, and to your second question, as early as possible, the better. It just makes the whole experience a bit better when everyone can act on the same side of the table, working end to end towards the exact same goal.
Right, it makes sense. Yeah, and game backend can often be an afterthought. So as I said, I talked to hundreds of game developers. Not often, but sometimes I would have a call with them 1 month to launch, and they're like, "Hey, we need to find a backend solution." I'm like, "You're a little bit too late." So, yeah, good points. Chris.
So for me, it's simple. It's load test, right? The earlier you can start taking game builds, especially if you can package them in a way that you can run them on some kind of spot instances in AWS, the quicker you can figure out pieces that are not going to scale, and therefore figure out where the hotspots are and solve them. And what we sometimes see with studios is they are load testing something that is maybe one endpoint or a couple of different features of the game, but they're not load testing what it looks like for the mixed workload of what players are actually doing when they're playing the games. And the quicker the studio can create these builds that can allow them to do that, the quicker you can find where those performance issues are long before you end up in production. Yeah, so that's what we recommend to studios. Yeah, that's our answer.
Yeah, load testing is great addition, and that's something you can do even with game clients. So you can scale out in the cloud, run them for an hour. You get a massive amount of players from different regions. So that's a good addition.
Yeah. I think even before we get to launch prep, I think when you talk about how early do you start, and there's a pretty clear distinction between game studios that have done online before and not. And it's a not uncommon example, I think, for people to be like, hey, at the end of the day, you're building a video game that you need to be fun. So for the first X years of production, you're trying to find the fun and focus on gameplay and iteration. However, the complexity of building a rich live backend from an engineering and scope perspective is going to be a multi-year effort. And so when teams fail to start integrating and working on their backend early, somebody put on the on the schedule 6 months prior to launch, let's just throw in all the Fortnite features and then we'll go. If you wait that long, it's going to be a train wreck. So we definitely try to help studios start as early as possible. when we talk about getting ready for launch, definitely full agree on everything related to load testing. It turns out, again, we have this problem of, for a traditional tech stack, you're going to launch a product that has 0 users and then hopefully build that over time. So you kind of have a chance to keep up with the growth or, try to stay ahead of it. But in games, it's the opposite. You're going to have the most players on day one. They're going to slam you right in the face. And from an engineering capacity, it's like how much time and energy and spend are you putting into your backend to make sure it's going to scale without the certainty of what your outcome is going to be. So you have to be ready on day 0. So we also heavily emphasize load testing. We tell studios we'd like to start at least 6 months ahead of time, pre-launch, because you have to go through cycles. We also really everything Chris said is exactly right. You want to build a mixed load scenario. When people do these isolated, I slammed one cache inventory retrieval call, therefore I can support 500,000 players. It turns out, if that database resource is shared or if those call patterns are in flows. So we definitely advise, building something that is as close to representative of a real player flow. And part of our technology stack and as a source code engine is all of the load testing tools we do to prove out the architecture and horizontal scale patterns. We also just package up and deliver as part of the product offering. So then as soon as we can convince the studio to sit down with us, we start building out those scenarios. And another big part of that is iteration cycle speed. So another attribute of when you have a backend that you can run as a dev environment, you can start authoring those scenarios and running 1,000, 5,000 player tests locally and just get the iteration right and get the test scenario right. And that's when you can then work on, okay, let's get the production infra scaled out. Let's get our load testing clients built and deployed out. So I think it's like a multi-phase process, and you definitely want to start early. And you don't want your first load test to be day 1 launch when you find out that you've got some bottlenecks.
Right, great. Yes, sir. So to recap, start early. Make sure you're doing load testing. Make sure you're doing load testing in a way that's like mimics the actual player traffic.
Yeah.
So all great points. One thing I would maybe add is like if you release a game in phase like do like close pre-alpha, you do an alpha, you do a beta, you can sort of a little bit gate it, and you get some real traffic early on with like a smaller set of players, which always helps. Then you can find out some of those challenges.
Yeah, those like any kind of pre-launch windows can be really powerful too, because you can also, if you've got the analytics and instrumentation in place, you can actually measure real player behavior. So once League of Legends was 3, 4, 5 years old, we had so much data about how players actually interacted, and so we could use that as a feedback loop to reinforce and redefine our load test scenarios to be more and more realistic. If you haven't launched your game yet, you want to get ahead of that. So these launch windows can be really powerful to learn how players are going to use your game, and that's going to better help your stress testing, be more effective and more realistic.
Yeah, exactly. I think we have time for one more question. One thing I wanted to bring up, because when we talk about something called live ops, which is a very ambiguous term. So I wanted to bring it up, like just to get your view on, is there a split between like your backend services, which is like player identity, player data, matchmaking, these kind of things, and like the live services side, which is like maybe things like player segmentation or campaigns or like changing game configuration on the fly, stuff like that. Like, is there a split between those two? Would you look at like different solutions for them, or would you like, is it all just like one thing? Is there some considerations in that space? Do I start?
Should I take it away? So yeah, we've taken a very distinct approach to that problem. We don't really see live ops as necessarily being directly associated to the game backend. They require different technologies, different database types. And so we actually broke them out into 2 different products. That means that we can give the best experience we can give for building event capture, experimentation, remote configuration, thinking about the calendar scheduling, the events calendar, and everything else that goes into that side of running the live experience for players, separating that out to the underlying core game backend services, things that power the leaderboards, the user accounts, and everything else that goes into running a live game. So we separate them out into 2 products. And that way, we believe that they scale differently. There's different users who are interacting with those systems, both within the studio and maybe as external partners to the studio. And so for that reason, we break them apart. Yeah.
Okay, so you see them as like more or less completely 2 separate areas.
They're kind of 2 different problem spaces that need solving. Yeah.
All right, cool. How about you, Ed?
Yeah, I would agree to some extent that there is definitely a bit of a difference between the 2. I think it kind of goes a little bit back to my previous answer as well, though, which is as games get longer and longer life cycles and they continue to exist for long periods of time, they really look towards their backend providers to be partners and someone who supports them throughout that journey. So I think as they're going through some of the issues that they might have, maybe certain uptimes that they might have for various events, maybe new DLCs, a new season pass, whatever it may be, having a backend provider who's there to help them and support them through that journey and acknowledge all of those challenges that they're having, bring them to the market, and ensure that we're meeting those challenges with them head on is going to ensure that there is a long-term plan and that the game is successful over a longer period of time. So to an extent, what I would say is we look at it as support is really the primary aspect to it as you transition into that pre-launch sort of build on the game.
No, thanks.
Yeah, I think like definition of terms is probably kind of important in this context because you got the live ops part of literally operating and running your service. Like, are the lights on? How many players are logged in? How many, there's like, is the game working? Then you've got the live ops part of the content management and the scheduling and the life cycle. So to kind of focus first on the like launch and stability part of live operations, it's an interesting problem that you basically get a quadrant. I'll get a little wonky here, so stay with me. You basically, I now just call it big data and small data. And then you've got game data and like service data. And so the idea of, is my game running? How many players are online? What volume of monetization are we pushing through? That's kind of a small data problem. And the reason from a technical side, you want to collect something like aggregated metrics is that running that in real time and relying on that for your alerting and like live ops, like when something breaks. Sometimes there's service providers now who are saying, oh, you can just run it through a big data pipe and we promise it's real time and fast enough. And it's like, it is until it isn't. And if you get backed up on your data pipeline by 18 hours, turns out that trying to run an alerting system on that isn't gonna hold up. Once you get into analytics and like managing how are players interacting with the game, how are they interacting with the content, that gets closer to a big data problem where it's like, now I just want to collect as much information about my players as I can to help my team know where do we want to emphasize and focus on our features. So I think that there's kind of this cross section that you want to focus on, and we definitely advocate for small data live metrics to make sure the lights are on. It's a lot easy to make that resilient and robust, whereas the big data pipe you can use for your offline data science analytics and optimizing. That kind of carries you then into the other side of live ops, which is the content management. And another big difference with live games is that you're trying to push new stuff to players on a regular basis. And it's a lot different than having 6 months or 12 months to come up with a new big DLC package. And so in order to pull that off, you've got a lot of complex tooling that gets very into the weeds of how your game is structured. So the kind of general approach and philosophy we try to help teams with is you've got core game content that's meshes and textures. That should be part of your patcher, and that's part of your core game tech. If you need to store and do progression and online and like managing content, we basically say, let's build a bespoke data model on your backend. And that's going to manage just the data that's platform authoritative. You want to keep that footprint as small as possible from a scalability perspective. And that's when you get into the needs of pushing new content out. So you might pre-patch, new content out to the game clients ahead of time, but then you're going to use a scheduler on the backend to trigger, flipping that bit on. And then you get into all the interesting problems of storing that data on the backend, migrating data. What happens if the player hasn't played for 6 months? You might have something in a database that's stale. So you have to work on how do we package our content, version our content, write those migrations. So those problems get pretty complex. And that's a big part of, again, trying to build that from scratch is going to be a lot of engineering time where you would rather just invest in gameplay and features.
All right, amazing. Yeah, we could easily talk all night. We probably will. But there's 2 more panels coming up. So at this point, I'll thank you, Ed, Chris, thank you so much for coming. I hope this was insightful for everyone here. And yeah, Seth, we have 2 more panels coming up, so stay tuned. And yeah, thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you.